In 1969, I was 16 years old in 1969, and there was a question that came on the radio. I was driving for a short period of time. You turned 16 in Ohio, you're able to drive. And we only had AM radio. Yep. But the question was this: war, what is it good for?
Nothing.
Oh, it's amazing. You know the answer to the question. That was a question that was being asked on radio in that song that Edwin Starr wrote. Everybody was singing it, especially the part. That was a very important part. Well, what war specifically did he write that poem and then song for? Well, of course, it was the Vietnam War. You can have any kind of opinion. History they're still writing stuff, and there's still people like me, baby boomers, who are alive during that time. Some served, and it's a part of our history. But the question is war good for anything? They gave the answer as no. We're going through Gog and Magog, or Gog and Magog, as Bruce would call it from the Hebrew. And he already told us that the war was really God done, right? So is war good for nothing? Well, I am a veteran's son of World War II. My mother's brothers and my father served in World War II. And I could tell you, as they gathered for every family event, whether it was a Jewish holiday or birthday or whatever, the guys would get together and reminisce about their war days. And I could tell you that I grew up believing that war could be good. When Adolf Hitler came to power and fascism was spreading across Europe, if it were not for Winston Churchill and later Roosevelt and even Stalin, if you get the big three of the Allies, they stopped fascism. They preserved, really, the Jewish people. I would make the argument that war could be good. Now, on the other hand, there's people I could hear already, people thinking, the wood burning, wait a minute, war costs lives. People die in war. War drains finances. I mean, it costs a lot of money. You go in debt, countries go in debt trying to fight wars, let alone the emotional distress, the physical, the psychological, PTSD. We hear about that all the time. In any country where people go off to war. And yet I'm telling you that in World War II, it was a good thing. I could go back to 1948 and the message I gave about the establishment of Israel. They got attacked the day after they were celebrating the reconstitution of the state. And I'm telling you there were 650,000 against 150 million who wanted them dead. And I am telling you that there was death and destruction, but there was preservation of the newborn state. I can tell you in 1967, a 6-day war fought by Israel, not because they wanted to, but because they were forced to. And again, thank God it only lasts 6 days, but the war preserved the existence of the state of Israel. I can take you to 1973 and the Yom Kippur War and the thousands that died, Israelis died, and how close they were to extinction being driven into the Mediterranean. And I would tell you, as bad as that Yom Kippur War was, and it was bad, it preserved the nation of Israel, where an enemy wanted to destroy them. And I could tell you on October 7th, 2023, I can tell you that there were people who wanted to see Israel destroyed, and they were more than happy to kill, rape, pillage, burn alive as many Jews as they could. And I would tell you that the response on the part of the Israelis, which was and has been bombing, and coming in with heavy artillery and airstrikes and all that is a necessity in order to preserve the nation of Israel. So, preservation is a very important word, and prevention, a very important word. God made a promise to Israel. In my first message, I told you about Ezekiel chapter 37 and the bones and no breath in them. Nonetheless, to establish the reconstituted state involved blood, shedding of blood, and necessary in order to preserve Israel and then prevent it from being annihilated. This war, Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, is a war that God brings to happen. Bruce told us about the hooks in verse 4, the hooks that God brings into the jaws of the nations up north and to the south to drive them to the attack. And when we think about that, what does God use? What does God use? Well, he uses man's greed. Man's greed. And for him, for God, what's his purpose? Glory. So we talk about the divine purpose. I think you could see twofold. Man's greed, and I'm going to talk about that. Interesting, Bruce talked about how little the state of Israel is, and 13 in Arizona. I could tell you, I lived in California. You could put 16 of them there. I lived in Chicago. You could put the whole country in there. It's a little country. There's not a lot of people, and yet people want them. They believe they're the focal point to, if you eliminate them, then there'll be peace. That's what a lot of people think. This trouble of Israel, they're the reason there's trouble. Just eliminate them and everything will be okay. It's an interesting philosophy. Get rid of these people, this little group, they're the splinter in all our lives. Just get rid of it and everything will be okay. So we have these hooks that go into the jaws of these nations, which Bruce told us about. And in verse 12 and verse 13, it says this: to take a plunder, to stretch out your hand against the waste places that are again inhabited. This is bothering them, that these waste places are now fertile. They're looking good. Let's get rid of them. And against people gathered from the nations who have acquired livestock and goods, who dwell in the midst of the land. And then it says, have you come to take a plunder? Have you gathered your army to take a booty, to carry away silver and gold, to take away livestock and goods, to take great plunder? So the purpose of this war, that God drives these people down to feed their greed. They want wealth. I told you how little Israel is. It is amazing what they've been able to accomplish. And I joked with you my first message and told you I graduated in the top 10% of the lower third of my class, which I did, by the way, because out of the 1,300 graduates in high school, 900 of them were Jewish. That's heavy competition. So I was down, I could say I was near the top if I compared myself to a lot of the Goyim, the Gentiles, but I was having a rough day, a rough 4 years of high school, because I think the first 150 went to Harvard, Yale, and MIT. I couldn't compete against that. But there's great wealth in Israel. They're successful in Israel. There's natural resources there. There's a warm water port there. And that, when I first became a believer, that was a heavy one, warm water port, because you see, the nations that Bruce was telling us about were the Soviet Republic. They were the Soviet Union. And as we already heard of these countries, this landmass was supposed to be communism. That's what I heard all the time. Well, folks, right now, if it were to happen, it wouldn't be communism. And the Bible doesn't tell you its geopolitical view. What it does is give us land masses. I was so thankful for the maps that Bruce gave to us Those are great to look over again because it tells you specific area from the south and from the north where they're going to attack. But do you know the Dead Sea? Many of you have been to Israel, and you go to a place called Ahava. Ahava that's where all the cosmetics are. Oh, I love going there when I'm on tour. All the ladies go. It used to be when I first went, it was the ladies and the men would roll their eyes. Now, the men. Oh, yeah, they have a whole men's section. The cosmetics they've drawn from the chemicals of the Dead Sea. And now you got guys the people come up, the people work there, and they put this stuff, feel that. And the guys are going, oh, this is nice. And I could take a bath. I've heard guys say, oh, I could bathe in this. I could put on a mud pack. And all that kind of stuff. You know, the Dead Sea's worth trillions of dollars. But I'm not so sure it's the Dead Sea or warm water ports. Golda Meir said this. She said, we Jews, we wish Moses would have made a different turn. He made the wrong turn. He turned to where there's no oil and gas. I wish he would have turned the other way. Well, for years, we thought she was right. We would laugh, but we would laugh because, Israel doesn't have the natural resources for energy. But that's not true anymore. Do you realize that off the coast of Israel, not very far, are such huge reservoirs of natural gas that not only Israel could take care of her population, they made an agreement with the European Union to help them. They signed that in 2022, and they're supplying them with natural gas. It's an amazing thing. And so you've got gas fields called Tamar, Leviathan, and Karnish, where there's all kinds of resources, natural resources. But it's not just wealth. There's land. And as small as it is, Bruce told us about it being a land bridge. It's so true. Strategic land. The greed of these nations is the strategic location. Yes, we could take their booty, but we could take their land. And it bothers us that even having 1 inch, these Jews having 1 inch of land, we want it. And the reason I could say that is there's another aspect to this, and that's racism. Racism, anti-Semitism. The landmass, when I grew up in my Christianity, I told you it was Russia and communism, and this was a battle between communism and capitalism. Well, that's not so much anymore. But now the land masses that we're talking about are Islamic. And the idea of a fundamental Islamic person, for Jewish people to exist, is negative, let alone in land that they believe belongs to them, because in Islam, once land's been taken over by Islam, it doesn't matter if they lose it, it's theirs. And once they settle in any place, which, by the way, are there radical Muslims in the United States? Are there radical Muslims in Europe? For those who hold to that radical position, once their feet touch on the soil, they regard it for Islam. And you need to understand that. Now, I'm not even saying that Islam is the reason, because I don't know when this battle specifically takes place. I'm already giving you the answer, and I'm supposed to answer the question. We'll talk about that. But the point is that currently, those nations, the people populating those nations, hold to a view that the land is not Jewish land, it's Muslim land. So the human reason for coming down and attacking is greed. It's to satisfy the lust of their heart, and they plan to do that. But God has a reason. God has a reason. And that reason, Bruce touched on it, and we need to say it again, is judgment. Judgment. God has to accomplish his purpose. Remember when we looked at Ezekiel 37, I talked about you need the reconstitution of the land. You do. But in God's mind is not just the reconstitution of the land. There has to be judgment. He has to display his glory, and in order to accomplish his ultimate purpose and plan is to deal with his people and ultimately bring them to their knees so that they'll believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the Messiah of Israel, the Lord Jesus Christ. So when is the attack is the question. If anybody tells you they know, Bruce stole my sei gesund, but it is sei gesund. Live and be well. If anybody tells you they know absolutely, they don't, because God doesn't tell us. But he gives us indications of when it isn't. And that is very interesting to me, because a number of years ago, I went with my son, and we, not far from where I live in a town called Levittown, about 30 miles from the location I'm speaking now. And there's another town called Ben Salem, and there's a very Hasidic group that has teaching that goes on there, and they had a neighborhood outreach, the Hasidim, a neighborhood outreach, and they invited anybody from the outside to come listen to a very famous rabbi who is going to talk about the last battle, the battle of Ezekiel 38 and 39. Oh man, the last battle, I want to go. And my son said, I want to go with you. So we went. And according to the rabbi, as he used Ezekiel 38 and 39 for his text, this was the last battle. You and I would say, oh, the last battle, he's talking about Armageddon. That's what we would describe as the last battle. But from their perspective, it was the last battle. Is it the last battle? No. Well, how do I know that it's not the last battle? Well, I know because of Bruce's message. That's how I know. Remember the maps? Was that a world map? No. Thank you for that. Amen. No. The map that he showed us limited nations that were directly north and south. The Battle of Armageddon, as we understand it, is a worldwide battle. All the nations of the world. That's a prophetic, that's coming from the prophet Zechariah. Ezekiel's giving us a limited amount of nations. Now, it doesn't mean it's not trouble, tsuris. It's big trouble. It's war. But I can tell you that it's not the last battle. So we know that. When we think of the last battle, we have to think of the time of Jacob's trouble to a point where nothing like this had ever happened to them. Jacob's trouble is found in Jeremiah chapter 30 and verse 7. This is a battle. It's bad. God is the one that intervenes. All that is fair, but it's not the last battle. In fact, when we think about what was described, the weapons that they use, there's 7 months of burial when they're defeated, 7 years of burning the weapons. So life seems to go on here in a normal sense because there's the aftermath of this battle. The Battle of Armageddon, as described, whether you're looking at the prophet Zechariah, the last battle there is where his feet will touch down on the Mount of Olives. That's a battle where the topography of that area changes and there'll be a river from east to west flowing from the Mediterranean to the Dead Sea. That's described not only by the prophets, but it's described by Jesus Christ in Revelation. So we know that this is not the last battle. By the way, there's some Christian scholars who believe that this battle already happened, that they're called preterists. They believe all this stuff has happened. And again, I don't know how you could do that, because as you simply read the text normally, what do I mean by that? I mean normally. That's what I mean. I mean, you read the text, it says words, and the words have meaning unless there's reason to think that it doesn't mean that in a symbolic way. There's symbolic language in the Bible, but it's indicated within the text. And that's what drives me personally crazy, is you take the text for what it says. The worst thing we could do, and I'm guilty of it, when I first started in the ministry, I had a Bible study, and one of the studies I used this: what does this mean to you? I don't know if you've ever used that or had a teacher tell you, what does this verse mean to you? I don't care what it means to you. I really don't. I hope that you can apply it in your personal life. That's a different question. But the meaning of the text should have nothing to do with your personal opinion. It should be taken from the text itself. And so as we look at it, we know it's to take place in the latter years. That's what the text says in verse 8 and verse 16. It's to take place in the latter years. Let's go through this so that we know it's not the last battle. You have Gog and Magog on one side, and you have Armageddon on the other. In Gog and Magog, the invasion takes place by Gog. Gog, Bruce. Gog, I know. In Armageddon, you have the invasion by the Antichrist and his armies. In Gog and Magog, you have Israel at peace. That's a big one. Israel at peace. Do you know today Israel's not at peace? October 7th indicated that. It talks about being unwalled village, unwalled area. Can I tell you that not only are there walls built by Israel, that you could see them, the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, which I would prefer to be called, but either way, West Bank or Judea, Samaria, there's a wall that was built. Israel didn't want to build it. Caused a lot of trouble. Why did they build it? Because they were being sniped at with real bullets over what was the border between the Palestinians and the Israelis. They built that with checkpoints because they were crossing over and killing people, blowing up people in pizza places. So they built a physical wall. But they also have a technological wall. In fact, they were pretty confident that the technology that they had would keep them safe. Thus, you have October 7th. And look, I wish they were right, and I know they wish they were right. But the enemy, Hamas, figured out a way to take millions upon millions of dollars worth of stuff to keep people out and to watch the borders and all that, and it didn't work. But if you talk about, is Israel at peace? Are their weapons put away? No. On the contrary, they want to build more. They want to get more ammunition. They've come to the United States continually asking to buy more supplies. So the invasion comes when Israel's at peace. You read about Armageddon, there's no mention of peace. The armies take a spoil. I talked about the greed that they were coming down to take a spoil. Well, the armies aren't coming for a spoil when they gather in the Jezreel Valley. They're coming to fight Christ. They're coming to fight the Jewish people. They are coming to fight the representatives of the Christ. The Antichrist is making his last stand. And there's no indication of that in this passage. The people described, as Bruce told us, Russia and their allies, but in Armageddon, it's the armies of the world, all the nations. I'm often asked, is the United States in prophecy? Oh, that's a great question. Is the United States in prophecy? There's actually a couple of Christian writers, books become very popular, that yes, we're in prophecy. And they quote from Isaiah, and I've had questions about it all the time. I had one person who told me, actually it was a former colleague of mine who told me, that a person came up to him and said, yes, The United States is in prophecy. And here's what he said, Jerusalem. Think about that. Jerusalem. Well, we don't do that kind of exegesis here at Friends of Israel. But I am telling you that the armies of the world, including the United States, folks, I got to tell you, I can't guarantee the existence of the United States when Armageddon takes place. I don't know. I hope the United States stays around for a while. It's been a great country for me and my people before me and people after me. But the fact of the matter is, there's only one golden Medina, only one golden land, only one chosen land for one chosen people, and it's not America. But the text says all the nations gather against Israel. So I have to say, well, if you want to say the U.S. is in prophecy, then that's where they are. So in Gog and Magog, all the nations will know that he is God because this war ends in victory. We'll hear about that. And in Armageddon, all the enemies of Christ are destroyed. But the question still remains, wait a minute, when does it take place? Well, in order to understand this, we have to understand another part of Scripture, and that is the plan and program for God. And we know that from Daniel, the book of Daniel, in Daniel chapter 9, tells us about the 70 weeks of Daniel. And there is 1 week left. Now, there's all kinds of opinions called the tribulation week, 70th week of Daniel, and there are different views. Some say, who hold to the what I would say the proper interpretation of Daniel and his 70 weeks. There'd be some who say, well, this battle takes place just prior to the rapture, before the rapture of the church. In fact, if you read the series Left Behind, those of you who might have read that book, the battle takes place at the beginning of his series, Tim LaHaye's series. And there's others who say, no, it's between the rapture and the tribulation. Some say the beginning of the tribulation, around the middle of the tribulation, just before the second coming of Christ. There's all these different views. Well, let's just make sure we understand what it is not. With all due respect to the Left Behind series, I read it. If we believe that it takes place before the covenant signing of Daniel chapter 9, if we believe that, then Jesus is not coming imminently. In other words, there has to be something that takes place before, because none of this can take place unless we have this battle. So I don't believe that this battle takes place before the rapture of the church. The other question, between the rapture and the tribulation period, I don't believe that it's then either, because Israel is not at peace until it signs a covenant promise with the Antichrist. If we understand it correct, and that's the big question, if we understand it's correct, then the Antichrist gives reason to Israel to let down its guard, and they will dwell in peace. They will turn it over to a political person who they believe has the know-how and the power to keep peace in the region. That's quite a thing. And right now, Israel today is not ready for that. They're looking for somebody. They'd love it to happen, and there's all kinds of indications to believe they would do it. Just follow the last 30 years as Israel's had meetings with various of our presidents, trying to sign treaties with the Palestinian people, believing there would be peace. All along, trying to turn land for peace. All that's been going on. They're looking for somebody. But it hasn't happened yet. And so the indication seems to me that sometime after the signing of this covenant, this agreement that's made between Israel and this person coming from the revived Roman Empire, who they believe is strong enough, wise enough. The Antichrist is described in such a way that people will place their trust in him, Israel particularly willing to turn the keys of the military, as it were, over to him. And so that must take place first. And if we determine, as said in the text, that 7 years of burning, 7 years of burning after this war, there's people who say, well, the burning can't happen to in the millennium. I'm not sure about all that. What I am sure is that the guard has to be down in order for it to take place. And so I personally believe that sometime after the signing of this agreement, where the Antichrist says to Israel, we guarantee your peace, the attack will take place, I believe, after that. And when God defeats them, as the text says, to bring glory to himself, and many people will believe, I believe what will happen is Antichrist is also going to use this victory by the invisible God accomplishing his purpose and say and take credit because he guaranteed peace and say, I was the one to do it. And believe it or not, delusion, which is spoken about in the New Testament, I believe there's going to be millions of people who will believe him. So, again, if anybody tells you they know, I'm not telling you I know, I'm just trying to give you what I believe are indicators as to why I personally believe, and I know I have several colleagues who agree, that it will take place sometime after the signing of this covenant. And it could play a role, ultimately, to the middle part of the tribulation that we read about in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 15, where the Antichrist sets himself up as God and walks into the temple and says, worship me. It seems to me that he's doing that because of the attributed success he's had invisibly of keeping his agreement with Israel. Look, I did that. I have power beyond what you can ask or imagine. Look, I saved you. And now he's going to demand worship. Again, not everybody agrees with me, but I think there's indication to think that way. And certainly, the verses that talk about peace, look, I'm a pro-hawk when it comes to Israel. And I thank God that our country through the years, not just any one president, several presidents have been used by God to supply Israel with the things that Israel needs to take care of itself. So, to me, that's a significant thing. So, what do we determine from all this? I think the key verse is found in Ezekiel 38 and verse 16. And I'd like you to turn there. Because the topic that I have involves man's greed, God's glory, and how that works in the timing and purpose that God has for Israel. And in verse 38 and in verse 16, here's what it says. You will come against my people Israel like a cloud to cover the land. It will be in the latter days that I will bring you against my land, so that the nations may know me when I am hallowed in you, O Gog, before your eyes. So I'm telling you that I believe God is doing this to bring glory to himself. I believe that the Antichrist is going to use it to bring glory to himself. And he's bringing to the people a decision that they've got to make. Ultimately, we all have to make a decision. And the decision always boils down to the invisible God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And most of the world who believes in him is ridiculed It's ridiculed by those who don't hold the same religion, but it's ridiculed by those who say there is no God. This whole thing is driven by greed of man, and God is driving them to display His glory and give people an opportunity then to believe, to witness what God has done, or to have their hearts hardened and say, no, we'll attribute it to a man. And we live in a culture today that is very much man-oriented more than God-oriented. You know, the good news is this, prophetically. You know, when David Gunn talked about prophecy as he introduced our time together, he talked about the importance of prophecy. We often think of prophecy as, the end times. Fair enough. That is part of it. But I want to tell you, I got saved. I came to know Jesus as my Messiah through prophecy. When I read Isaiah 53, I was reading a chapter that was written 700 years before Christ. And so much of the Bible is prophecy, but some of it, a lot of it, is fulfilled already. And if what God said would happen, and it has happened exactly as He said, that ought to be an encouragement to us, because, wait a minute, this happened exactly as He said, but this hasn't happened. It's going to happen. Do I believe it? Well, I got to tell you, He's been right on all along. I'm going with Him. I'm going with Him. But if God breaks a promise, and that's why Israel's so important, I say this all the time. If God is faithful to the Jew, and He is, look at the establishment of the place, He is, then God will be faithful to you. Because, folks, all we have is a promise. So you believe, I take it by being here, you believe when I face God and He's going to say, I know this is just a hyperbole here, it's just we make it up. God's going to say, should I let you in? And you say yes, because you promised that if I believe in Jesus, I'm in. And we say yes. Well, wait a minute. If God is lying about Israel, same scenario. Should I let you in? Well, I don't know. You lied about Israel. I did believe in you, but now I'm not so sure. If God lies once, we have nothing to stand on. God must be faithful to His character, and He doesn't lie. And so this text it's going to happen. I told you I believe it's going to happen in the tribulation period, sometime early on, in order to accomplish God's purpose. And there'll be many who will believe in Him, but there'll be a host of people who won't believe. They'll believe in a man. And so we need to bank on the fact, and we can, that God has become a man, but He's the God-man, and we trust in Him.